if we look at, like, for example, long-term thinking. So when you walk into a club, right? So if you're looking at a club right now, let's kind of look at a club and you're looking at the long term. Just as an example, give us a club that you're thinking of, or just that you can think of, and you think, okay, long term. What's the long term process of that?
I think long term, for me, in the start, you've got to be looking at 3 to 5 years. Now that might not seem long term, but in football, it is long term.
It's a long time, yeah.
So 3 to 5 years, where do we want to be? So you come back to, you look at a club in say a club in the National League. You say in 3 to 5 years we want to be challenging for promotion to the Championship, or we might say we want to be in the Championship. So you're talking about 1, 2, 3 promotions to inside 5 years. Seems very ambitious. And you look at that and say, okay, how do we get that? And the English way is to put money behind players and behind managers. So for me, the starting point, you would review everything you have in the building already. What have I got? What players have I got? What's my structure look like? What are my people like? It might take you 6 or 12 months to get the right people in the building.
Right.
So in that time, you might have some failures. You might get relegated. And therefore, there's a tendency, you would hope you wouldn't get relegated, but there's a tendency then to focus on that short-term thinking rather than the longer-term thinking. But I recently heard a story about, I think it's a club called Enin in Slovakia, I think it is, or Slovenia. And the people that bought that club a few years back had the similar sort of philosophy I'm talking about, but they wanted to get into the Champions League. And in their very first season, they got relegated into Division 2 in that country. But it was necessary to reset the baseline, if you like, and get the right people in the building. They then got promoted, and the next season they won the Championship and they got into European competition. And so it's focused on the longer term objective rather than reacting to a short term scenario. Have I got the right recruitment? So start at the very beginning. What's my player recruitment look like? What type of players do we want? It comes back to identity. So purpose and identity are, for me, at the core, that starting points. Purpose, what are we trying to do? Identity, who are we? What do we stand for? What type of people are we? And all those sort of things. And then it's about making sure you have the right type of people in the building. And that may take you a while. Recruiting players and then developing those development paths for players is difficult and takes time. And so in the first year or two, you've got to balance longer term with shorter term. But if you continue to run short term thinking, you're only going to achieve success in the short term. It's not a sustainable model. So there's got to be a shift away from short term mentality. Sack the manager, bring a new manager in. That's a short-term mentality for sure. What sort of manager do you want? For me, you would have a manager, you would have a head coach whose job is to develop players. You want your coach developing players and creating tactical formats and structures to win games, and not influencing, not being the key decision maker on transfers and influencing that. He's got to be joined up with the younger teams, coaches, and the whole club developing players in a similar way. And I mentioned Ajax earlier. I've been to Ajax, and all their teams play the same way at all levels. And as the players develop through, you finish up with the first team that's an average age of 22 or something the last time they played, and they're just all playing the same way. And the players coming through, as soon as they get in the first team, the style of football is exactly the same.
Yeah, and I think that's also what's also important. You know what I mean? So when you even think about, even as you look at that, so when you're looking at the longer term thinking, then of course you look at like the fan management. So the fans are the unpaid extras in the theatre. It's kind of what I would call them, you know what I mean? That's literally what they are. I actually did acting when I was younger, so I'm quite familiar. Yeah, I did. So, and it's never nice. It's like, oh yeah, you're an unpaid extra. Oh yeah, thanks.
I've got a face for radio, not acting.
Yeah, that's it, man. So I mean, I definitely, when you're kind of around that as an unpaid extra, now, so if you look at them, how important are they to football clubs, though? Because if you look at it, they're almost like your ambassadors, like your early adopters, or if you want to look at it like that.
Absolutely, Nick. And so, fan engagement is an easy phrase everybody talks about, but it's with any situation in any high performance organization, it's the actions and the behaviors that make the difference, not the words. So,
right.
True fan engagement, I think, is a very open, two-way, transparent conversation and discussions with the fans. It's about being open with them about the good and the bad, and right. what the expectations levels are. I listened recently to the chief exec at Portsmouth talking about what they've done there, and Plymouth, they're another one at the moment. Really superb fan engagement at both clubs there, and right. relatively under the radar of the sort of national press. And again,
sometimes that's actually a good thing, though, because it's a good thing. It'll prepare them for when they do get promoted and they progress. You know what I mean?
But again, high numbers of season ticket holders that have continued to support and not ask for their money back because the clubs are communicating. They're being open with the fans. They're working with the fans, and so I think that open, transparent communication, regular dialogue, being clear about your expectations. And then understanding what it is about the fans. And, I think there's two other elements to this. One is the fan experience. How many clubs that you go to and the facilities for the fans are still what they were 20 years ago?
Yeah, I'm dealing with a club at the minute in regards to that. And that's what I've actually said to them. I said, there's no real value proposition here. You're not going to move people, sadly.
It's got to change to being an experience, People regularly talk about the first game they went to was when the dad took them, the parents took them to a game, and it's that experience, and it needs to become an experience. And some clubs, I think in Europe are doing. I think Dortmund do this well. They open
they're very good. Yeah, excellent.
They open their sort of fan zones. I think at 10 o'clock in the morning or something.
Absolutely. Yep.
I think Tottenham are doing this with the new stadium, aren't they? They're trying to get fans in and around the stadium for much longer rather than just the hour and a half of the match. And so what is the experience of the fan? And I think it can be taken a stage further, Nick. It can be taken from when they get on the bus to travel to the stadium. If they're parking in a car park and getting on a bus, or the last half a mile they're walking to the stadium, what can you do in those situations? I heard recently of a story, I forget which club it was, but there's various park and rides where the fans park and get the bus into the stadium, and the buses are all branded with the club, and they've got video screens playing clips of the games on that final 20-minute ride into the stadium. Fantastic.
Right, okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah,
and then,
absolutely.
Then you've now got all the digital transformation that is available to clubs, and all the digital interactions that are possible. And again, I sense that it's only the very bigger, much forward-thinking clubs that are doing these things, whereas the lower clubs are not necessarily embracing the whole digital opportunity.
Yeah, and I think as well, that's actually where I see a lot of these clubs going wrong, because I believe you can definitely create those resources. I don't think it costs a lot of money.
No.
And to me, it's just laziness. It's just not. It's just. But I think as well, football does attract certain individuals. I'm not being funny. They think they had a biz. I mean, I spoke to one guy recently, Tony, and he was telling me about a non-league club, and this guy's got he's got £1 billion business. Yeah. And some of the things he was telling me, I was absolutely shocked at. And just the way he treats people, the way, just his demeanor and his temperament is not, I don't think it's suited to football or how, you know what I mean? I think
it's what we touched on right at the beginning, Nick. It's this closed thinking of we just done, this is how we've always done it, and this is how this is what we're continuing to do, and being open. But the pandemic in many businesses has sort of turbocharged innovation and transformation that may have taken 10 years of evolution has been condensed into 10 or 12 months, and there's a real opportunity here for clubs to embrace technology and there's so much stuff available, and then understanding the fan interaction with the club. You know, there's data and big data. There's all these things get talked about, but it's understanding what interactions your fan has. You know, when do they buy a replica shirt? When do they, what do they buy at the food store? What do they, you know, how often do they come to the stadium? You can have all this data that gives you insight into their experience, and then you can learn more intelligently about how you can enhance that experience. And it's just fundamental stuff that in business these things are happening, but in the business of football they're not necessarily happening.
Let's just this one. So we're going to hit on the player and youth development concept of Tony that kind of come to see Continental Aspire Soccer TV and actually watch us. And so if we look at like hot or for example, hot up and coming aspiring players, you know what I mean, that are close to first team level. So how do you implement the best youth development strategy from like a business standpoint?
Well, I think you know I'm no expert in that field, Nick, but my view would be you would need to identify, first of all, how does the club want to play football? You know, what do we stand for as a club, and what's the style of play and type of game we want to play at the club? And once that's been agreed between the senior members of the board or the management, including the technical staff in the building, understanding and defining how it is we want to play. I think there's a big element to this as well with fan engagement. You know, as a fan, you want to see your team playing exciting football, everybody giving it their best, you know, continuing to chase balls in the 94th minute and this sort of thing. And actually, Leeds United are doing a very good job at that at the minute with Bielsa. You know,
they are.
Their players are still running at high speed in the 94th minute, but fans want to see that. So if you develop the identity and almost the DNA of what our football team wants to be in the future, understanding that, then you can start to define and articulate the types of players that will fit into that structure, and then what type of coaches you want in order to develop that into a successful team. Now, you know, if you look at Ajax, you know, they all play 4-3-3. You know, fast movement, high press, and so on. And if that's the way you want to go, then all your teams at different age levels need to be playing the same way, and the coaching at each level needs to be joined up. And I think it's Benfica. They have four core elements to their player development, but one of them is the coaches move between different age groups.
Right.
So the coach for the under-17s, he's not in charge of the under-17s. You know, he's a coach so it's not his team, if you like. He's just coaching them in the Benfica way. So you're developing a style of play, a style of coaching, a style of behaving on the pitch that is the way of the club rather than the way of the coach.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm definitely a big believer in that, man. I've seen the positive. I know at Ajax they do that quite a bit, it's definitely a very important element. So when you're looking at that, so if you're looking at that, so you kind of look at the club, you look at the strategy. Once that's kind of refined, in like the long term, how do you make a club that's community focused? So, what would you say that's going to be about? So whenever you're speaking to these owners, and it's all good and well, people taking over clubs, but then you got to do it once you go in there.
I think the community focus bit is most clubs will have some sort of a foundation already in existence. But again, I think it's quite often very much the poor relation of the organisation. It's there and it exists, and quite often it exists on charity donations and so on. But there are a lot of clubs now have a community liaison officer, and these individuals will basically be tasked with getting involved in any community group within the city or area that the club is playing in, and that can be across any type of community organisation. So it's just reaching out and being part of the community that the club plays in, and engaging with them and trying to use, if you like, the power of football to help and improve people's lives beyond the foundation sort of charity stuff. And again, I mentioned Burnley, but Burnley are doing a fantastic job with their foundation, and it's been run like a professional. It's been run like a professional business, and making a real difference. And so, for me, it's about just reaching out and being part of that city and town where the club plays, but through the actions and behaviours of the club and the individuals, rather than just about being there. And
because I know when you're talking about like a strong financial management and how they're all interconnected, like the 5 pillars are all interconnected, Tony. But if you're looking also, I mean, Burnley's they've went from 20 million to 202 million, in 10 years. So that's pretty remarkable. So if you're looking at that as like, if you got any proud success stories that you think are as good as that, if not better. I know you've kind of mentioned Borussia Dortmund and Benfica, and Ajax.
Burnley is the best example there, Nick. They've been criticised over many years now for not spending on players, and the press and the media will have you believe that the success is down to Sean Dyche, which they're absolutely right. Without Sean Dyche, they would not be where they're at. But actually, behind the scenes, what people don't realise is they managed to buy back the stadium, they managed to buy back the training ground, and they've invested, I don't know how many millions, into a brand new training facility that opened only last year or the year before, and that is now a Category 1 academy. So behind the scenes, they've been investing in all this stuff, but all you see in the media is they're not signing players. And now that so the success on the pitch, you could argue, is down to Sean Dyche, and it is. But as a whole organisation, they've invested profit back into infrastructure. So they've bought the stadium, they've invested into a new training facility. They're, I guess, investing in their foundation, and they're preserving cash. I said to you, on completion of the sale,
that's the key. Right. Exactly.
They had £43 million in the bank. There's not many football clubs sitting on that amount of cash. Now, any other club might have gone and spent 20 million on another player. So there's been very strong financial management throughout, working to budgets, investing and reinvesting in infrastructure, not taking the cash out. So you mentioned Man United. There's something like over £1 billion of interest payments have been made that have left the club in the Glazers in the Glazers' tenure. So, but Burnley have reinvested. They've preserved cash. They've worked to budgets. They've reinvested in infrastructure, and they've got cash surplus in the bank. Now, is that wrong or is that right? We can debate that all day long. The fans probably would want to invest in lots of players, but actually, 2 seasons ago they finished 6th in the league. And then they got into the Europa League. They got into the Europa League. So 2 seasons ago, it was a big success. I think the Europa League took its toll, and they just managed to avoid relegation, didn't they, last season? This season, they seem to be pretty steady at where they're at right now. So,
yeah, they've got a good model, Burnley. I think they get a lot of flack in the press, but I would totally agree with you there. If you look at the financial elements, because it's like what you said. So they got a good stadium. You're looking at large local population. You know what I mean? A one club city, which is what Burnley are. So we're using them as like a kind of the poster child. Town history of player, academy, and this is interesting, right? I don't know if you're aware of this. You went to Ajax, right?
Yeah.
Right. There's a stand at the Johan Cruyff Arena, and you know what it's called? It's called the Jack Reynolds stand.
Yeah.
At the Cruyff Arena. Do you know he was a Burnley legend?
All right.
And he was one of the founding people of Ajax. Most people don't know that, but I know this because I've been going, because I know most of the people at Ajax, so that's how I know this. And his there's like an Ajax historian that I speak to sometimes, and so I've kind of really got to learn that. I remember Johan Cruyff told me, he said, Nick, you need to get in touch with these Ajax historians, because they're really, really interesting. And yeah, so very interesting.
I'll check that out. But in terms of
Burnley, man. So Burnley are very successful, man. So you can actually say Burnley founded Ajax in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Burnley fans have got something to be,
I'll mention that to my Dutch colleague when I'm speaking to him. But I think, if you look at it from an investor's perspective, Nick, any investor wants to know where he's going to make his money or get his return. And Burnley are a very, very good example. 10 years ago, they're in the Championship. They were actually in Division 1 a few years before that, and they've been a bit of up and down. And then the last 8 years, they've had sustained high performance in terms of where they're at. And that's resulted in their value, being up at 200 million from 20 million 10 years ago. Now, as an investor, that's a success story. As I say, for the fans, I suspect they're very happy with where they're at because they're an established Premier League club. The media might have a different view, but if you look, what will be the challenge, I think, for Burnley now is succession planning for the eventuality of Sean Dyche not being there.
Well, you know what I would say, so could you talk us through each one? So you look at the four things. What is the most important of the things that we've hit on? And I know it's hard to kind of hit on them in terms of when you look at the five, but in terms of what is the most important one out of all five and the five pillars of success?
Well, I think the most important one is probably not in those pillars because you've got the pillars of the framework wrapped around that, and I think the most important element is the leadership.
Right. So
it's you need that framework, but then it's the people that are in the building, and that starts at the very top. So for me, if an investor is looking to buy a club, it's about who's at the top of the table, if you like, who's leading the organisation, and that might be more than one individual. So that leadership group needs to live and breathe and understand the purpose, the identity of the club, and then that needs to become the fabric of the whole organisation, and that helps then drive the type of people you get inside the building, and ultimately it drives the culture of the organisation. And because the framework there, Nick, to be fair, those are the building blocks. So it's a bit like I said earlier, everybody can put things together, machines, equipment, stadium, a pitch. Those are building blocks, but it's then the people around it and involved in it that make the real difference.
That's one thing I was actually going to say is that because when I'm actually looking at Tony, when we're looking at the expert, so if we're looking at expertise, right, to test the enjoyment, so for example, of our audience. So if you had to pick one championship club, so we'll kind of look at them as a whole, and we'll kind of hit on a bit of both. And you had to invest a lot of money right now, right? Yeah. Which club would it be, do you think?
Championship club. Oh, crikey. Putting me on the spot. You're putting me on the spot there. Well, of course, everybody talks about you want a sleeping giant, and there's probably a couple that offer a potential. Nottingham Forest is one, Sheffield Wednesday potentially. Clubs that have got
great history.
Yeah, and they've got a huge fan base that you could tap into. And of course, Derby County is one that should be up there. If budget wasn't an issue, you'd be certainly looking at one of those three, I would imagine. But I know they've all got, I think two of them are potentially for sale. I don't think Notts Forest is. Notts Forest is owned by a Greek billionaire, and he's happy to put more money in. But their wage bill has been in excess of 100% of income for the last 10 years.
Oh my goodness!
And he's just continuing to throw money at it, hoping for a better outcome, and it's just not going to happen.
That's the Yeah, that's really a good business practice. So I definitely see what you mean. Yeah, when you're looking at it now, because do you know one of the things that I've learned probably when I look at a business as a whole, the objective when you go into a business, and I think the Glazers have done this very, very well, is they went and took United. It was all debt that they acquired, which I'm actually a big fan of, by the way. I do like that. But one of the things I would say is that they've used the resource, they've used the commercial stuff, so they've actually brought value in. You know what I mean? It's not. People say the Glazers haven't brought value in. I just think that's people who don't really know business. That's my opinion. I don't think that. I think they're clueless. And I think they're in the Stone Age. They believe that it's not 2021 thinking, you know what I mean? And also United actually paid staff really well. They've also started an anti-racism campaign. They're doing other things that other clubs are not doing. So in my opinion, that's actually a really great thing, because they would have power to go and do that. And I think they're showing, and they've done better than Liverpool. They've done more stuff than Man City. They've done a lot of stuff that I think other clubs haven't done. I think how their academy is doing. You look at what you know what I mean? They've really utilized what they've had, and so they're not, you know what I mean? So when I'm looking at a business model, so we'll kind of hit on. I just want to ask you something I think is actually quite important, right? So if you look, which club has impressed you the most, Tony, from like a business perspective, where you think they're impressing me with what they're doing?
Well, there's different levels. I think there's different levels. I think lower level, you've got clubs like, I think I mentioned Plymouth and Portsmouth are doing very well. I think Plymouth are again, there's things going on there that people are not aware of in terms of positive things. And but you've got clubs, I think, like Walsall and Shrewsbury Town that break even or make profit every year. And they're obviously operating at a level, but for me, I mentioned Norwich City. The model that I'm talking about and advocating is basically being lived out in what Norwich City are doing, and they're going to become. I think next season they've got every chance of retaining Premier League status. If they don't, they'll come down. They'll go up again. But in terms of a financial model and fan engagement, fans engaged. Fans' expectations is they're getting relegated, and quite often fans tell you that they prefer to be at the top of the Championship than bottom of the Premier League, because if you're down the bottom of the Premier
absolutely.
League, you're getting beat every week. But in terms of their model, they're sticking to it. They've got, in actual fact, they've got a very interesting leadership. They've got 3 executive officers, if you like, that run the club. There's no chief exec. There's 3 that work in collaboration. One on business operations, I think the chief operating officer, and then sporting director, and then a sort of a buildings type role looking after the facility. So the 3 of them work as a senior executive team, collaboratively working in the guidance of the board of directors. So it's a very much everybody working together, pulling together, whole organisation approach, including the 20-odd thousand season ticket holders. And it's just very, very impressive.
I know Manchester United did that recently. When they did that, they brought in 2 different people for like what normally would have been before like one position. And when you look at that, it's kind of similar, isn't it, Tony? Where there's an understanding there. And I think that you see, it's interesting when I see the media, and they have an agenda, and I'm thinking, okay, but you don't run a business, so you've only been a player. No offense. And it's not like I'm looking down on them, but I'm just thinking they've overlooked why they're doing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it comes back to purpose.
Yeah. And I mean, even so, if I'm looking, I would just flip onto that, but I just thought that was interesting. You know what I mean? On the flip side, which club do you think is doomed if it continues to go on its business and that it's actually going to fail if it continues to do what it's doing.
I think I mentioned Sheffield Wednesday. I think Sheffield Wednesday's in a whole heap of trouble, aren't they? And if they get relegated this season, then who knows where they're going to go, and it might be very difficult to come back from it. And I think they've got an interim manager, I believe. I don't think they've got a chief exec. They've got an owner that's stuck in Thailand that can't get over here because of international travel. It's just a very fragmented operation, and there's teams that if they get relegated to League One, quite often it takes them down to League Two, and then it takes them a long time to get back. So I would be fearful if I was a Sheffield Wednesday fan for sure. And
it's funny. I spoke to a guy that used to be the chief exec there, and he works for Marseille now.
Yeah,
he does all of the sales. I don't know if you know that. I'm trying to think of his name. I've got his name somewhere, but I know he. That's definitely an interesting one.
I think the other Sheffield club is going to be interesting, Sheffield United, because if you believe the press and the sort of the feelings between the owner and the manager who's no longer there, they're obviously getting relegated. I suspect they're going to lose quite a lot of their top players. And clubs that go down, if they lose their players because of player wages, then generally they finish up with a different team and don't do very well. So I could see Sheffield United also struggling next season, but it'll be interesting to watch that one.
I'm a big believer when you go into a club, you stick with the club philosophy. So if the staff changes, you don't lose anything. And I've always said to people, that's how a club should be run. Don't try and up it for like a personality. I just think it's good as a business. And the thing is, my grandfather, he was a majority shareholder of Glasgow Celtic, and they never made those types of mistakes. They said what Celtic did. And so if a manager came, and the club was kind of formed around the time when Jock Stein came in, and that's kind of when the success started to come. And I think that's where clubs definitely make mistakes, for sure. So if we look at the focus on youth development, so we think of clubs that rely on older players. So if you look at, for example, Crystal Palace in the Premier League, or even Roma in Serie A, and where they have players like, for example, Edin Dzeko, Terrian, Pedro, Chris Smalling, and more than 30 players. They're 30 plus, basically. What do you that as a model? So Sheffield United, you're saying, will have a similar model to that if they're not careful.
Well, I don't know the details in Italy, but certainly Crystal Palace is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think they've got, is it 13 or 14 players are out of contract this season? And that's been reported in the press. So that suggests there's not really been any planning or longer term planning. And there's potentially 13 players going to walk out the door in the summer. Whether that's a strategic move to something else, I don't know. But it's a very strange one, because that's a lot of players that are out of contract, and obviously they're going to retain their Premier League status, but it's back to the short-term, long-term mentality, Nick, isn't it?
Right.
Palace have flirted with relegation for a few seasons running. Roy Hodgson's done a good job in stabilising them. So is he going to stay? And which players are they going to have next season? And it's almost like they're starting again potentially. So there's no longer-term thinking, and you without it, you're always going to have this sort of yo-yo situation of yes, we do okay a season or two, and then we struggle for a season or two, and it's just, I don't see how anybody can operate in that way in a successful way.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting. I mean, it's funny. I remember when I had Laurie Pinto on the show here, just to kind of hit on that. And obviously, in terms of working in terms of football experts, and I think that there are people that really know the landscape, people like yourself, Laurie Pinto, people like that, because you're in it every day. You see what's going on. And obviously, you've obviously pointed out Benfica, and I think that's absolutely spot on. You know what I mean? Because I think they're doing some really good things. I think they're making some good moves. So from Europe for having the best transfer strategy, is there any other club you'd like to single out, either in the UK or abroad? You feel like their strategy is quite clear? You know, that could be the youth. It could contain to kind of first team players. You know.
Well, not especially, Nick, but there are. You know, from my research, there was a number of clubs scattered across Europe that I'd never heard of, frankly, that were selling 20, 30 million euros of players every year. So this is not just happening at top level; it's happening lower down. I mean, one club that I think is really interesting in Spain is Eibar. I don't know whether you're familiar with FC Eibar, but they're in Bilbao, in the Basque Country. And there was a documentary about them maybe last season or the season before, but they're definitely punching above their weight in terms of where they are in the league. And it's because they have this togetherness, the fan engagement, the player development, all the things we're talking about. And they're managing to maintain their status in the top league in Spain. And they're a small club. So there's just the point, I suppose, is there is evidence around Europe that smaller clubs can succeed at a higher level by developing youth, by having a longer term approach, and success on the pitch comes as a consequence of that longer term thinking and strategic planning.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. So when you think of the long term thinking, do you think also equals out in terms of trophies, things like that? Do you think it definitely balances out there as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, back to expectations, isn't it? You know, does Norwich City expect to lift a trophy? They're obviously going to be.
I think that's highly unlikely. Yeah.
They're going to be crowned champions.
They're
going to be champions of the championship, but you know. Are they going to lift a cup, or they're not going to be challenged at the top of the Premier League? So, you know, it's about expectations, isn't it? I mean, but then it comes back to, I think, then entertaining the fans. I mean, football is in the entertainment business, and this is what a lot of clubs don't realise. You're in the entertainment business, so fans come into the game. You've got to think about that fan experience, but actually, they want to be excited and they want to be proud of their team, if you like. And they want to see the team, you know, if they're going to get beat, they want to see them go down fighting. And so that's at the fundamental element of you like the lower clubs or smaller clubs developing. Trophies are a different situation. I think if somebody wants to own a club that has potential to win trophies, then I think you've got to be thinking bigger budgets. But then, you know, potentially you can look at a smaller club in a smaller country. I mentioned, I'm sure it's called Enin in Slovenia. You know, they bought that club with a view of following this type of model and getting into European competitions. So they might draw Barcelona or you know, Madrid in a European competition, and that's what they did because it enabled them to qualify for Europe easier because it was a smaller nation, smaller country. So I think from advising investors, it's about understanding what an investor is looking to achieve with their investment. You know, what is the investor's expectations? If the investor wants to win the Premier League, then you know, he's going to want hundreds of millions, isn't he? For sure.
He is, absolutely. You know, right.
You know, so it's about understanding that expectation and then advising on what type of club might be possible to achieve within that their budget and objectives and reasoning for doing it.
I think as well, I mean, when I look at Tottenham, for example, I look at them and they're a club that aren't really clear. I think Daniel Levy, from going from Pochettino to Mourinho, that shows me there's not really a clear objective there. Yeah. I just don't see the direction. No. I think business-wise, I think maybe that's where Daniel Levy's going because he's now got the NFL, and that stadium's a remarkable stadium. The Spurs Stadium, it's definitely one of the best in the Premier League, but so I'm not sure what he's going to do there. Let's just look at post-pandemic. So we've covered the effects of COVID-19 before. So how Barcelona have been plunged into debts of hundreds of millions. So, and it's interesting because they obviously had Haaland going there. I do not really see them buying Haaland. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I do not see that happening. Because I think what he would command as well. And then if you look at how clubs are losing millions of revenue, right? But also if you look at like the pandemic stuff to the Euros this summer, which club do you think needs fans to come back the most because of the pandemic?
Difficult question, that, Nick. I think all clubs do, but the higher up the tree you are, the less dependency you have on fans. So you look at obviously with the European clubs like Barcelona, they don't have the TV money that comes from the Premier League. So the Premier League sides, their attendance revenue is a small percentage. And you mentioned Man United. Man United are one of the few clubs that generate more commercial revenue than TV revenue.
Well, Man United, I think, get more commercial revenue than most clubs. They'd be in than most clubs, I would say. I think, because I've been looking at their TV revenue or their revenue in general, and they're way ahead of everyone.
Yeah, completely. And that's why the Glazers were able to leverage that income, if you like. But most Premier League clubs, if they've got 150 million of revenue, 120 of it comes from TV money. So it's whereas Man U's the other way around. But the lower leagues, I think clubs that need fans back most are teams in League 1 and 2, and because the majority of their income comes from match day attendance, and you can't really pick any one club out. But I think the lower league sides need fans back sooner rather than later. I mean, I live in Harrogate in North Yorkshire, and Harrogate Town are at Wembley. I think it's the FA Trophy in May.
Yeah.
And there's going to be no fans. But for a small club like that to be at Wembley with no fans is sort of heartbreaking in a way, isn't it? Because
it is. Well, I think it's going to be nice. I think once the vaccine is sorted, that'll kind of fix itself. I think as well. I mean, just on that as well. You know what I mean? So, what do you think? So, if you're looking at like an opportunity to invest in football, do you think we actually could see a boom in investment in football clubs across Europe, or mainly in England?
I think there's going to be a lot of clubs acquired across Europe. I've touched on, there's a lot of American interest in football or soccer. The growth in soccer in the States is exponential. It's going through the roof. There are already 6 American owners in Serie A, and you've already got 3 or 4 or 5 in English football. So, but I think they're a different type of buyer because they're quite often investment funds or private equity type investment, and it's much more a considered financial investment rather than anything other than looking at the numbers. And certainly, Burnley, is exactly that. You've got other situations, I think, Nick, where you've got multi-club ownership becoming more of a common theme. You've got the guys that own Barnsley. I think they've got a French club and they might have a Spanish club. They've just bought a Danish club. You've got multi-club ownership becoming a more common model after the Man City football group, but also Red Bull are trying to do some of that. I think there will be more acquisitions of clubs in the next 6 months for sure. Whether it's going to boom or not, I don't know. But it's
you know what I find interesting though, Tony, just on what you just said. I think where people are going to hurt the most in business is the people that will do the best financially is the people at the top, and then the people at the bottom. I believe in the middle. If you're in the middle, you're going to get hammered. That's definitely. And I always say to people, I mean, it's interesting when I speak to my kids, I always tell them, I said, listen, you want something, you've got to read a book. You've got to read a chapter. That, like, books are like a currency in my house, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you're not reading something, you're not building your skills, you know, at the end of the day, because I'm trying to prepare them for the world they're going into. And in order to do that in the world we're going into, because middle class, that's why the people are always complaining about the equality, and people are complaining about the money in football all the time. And if you're not in football, people don't really understand it. I think it's just a lack of understanding. Tony, so just before we end out here, so if we're looking at like future goals, what are going to be your goals in the business of professional football?
I've got one sort of fairly simple headline goal, Nick, and that is to be involved in the leadership of a football club somewhere. And whether that's advising an investor in an acquisition and then leading the organisation for that investor, or working with an existing club who wants to take a different approach. You know, I'm really keen to be involved at the leadership end of a football club and really help define and shape and deliver success over a longer period. And I think, you know, as you alluded to there, I think the opportunity and the real value is in the lower leagues. So leagues 1 and 2, maybe National League. There's opportunity there to take something from sort of £5-10 million value into certainly a 50 million value over five to 7 years, something like that. And then, you know, you realign yourself when you get to that point. But and I think within a couple of seasons, you would be able to get that club to being self-financing and self-sustainable financially.
Absolutely, that's definitely the name of the game. I think people forget that. You know what I mean? And where do you want to? What's your business aims in the future? What are your business aims?
Well, my business aims is to focus on sport. I guess, you know, as I've said, I'm working still in business. I'm doing a little bit in sport, but I want to be more sport focused and the business of sport focused. But clearly, if I achieve my goal and finish up leading a football club on behalf of the owners, then that will be 100% of my focus for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely solid, Tony. And I think I've definitely learned a lot just listening today. Just your background, I've really enjoyed this. I love speaking to people, especially capitalists. You know what I mean, and people who work in the business community. And I think, yeah, and I'm definitely still hoping to learn more off you the road here. I really appreciated your time. And like I say, Tony, if anybody has any questions, where can they reach you? Any of our audience, if they want to reach out to you?
Well, I've got my website is thetonywebster.com. Is my sports business website. So yes, we've got again the Tony Webster on Instagram. I'm at Wayfinder Tony on Twitter. And the Tony Webster on Facebook. Okay. So yes, we've got again the Tony Webster on Instagram. I'm at Wayfinder Tony on Twitter, and the Tony Webster on Facebook.
Okay, so they can. So we'll obviously we'll actually drop all those in. So even if you can hand over to us, Tony, and we'll put it in the video. So if people need them, then what we'll do, we'll put them out there. So if anybody wants to reach you, and like I said, everyone, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification squad. So just hit the little bell down the bottom right there, and any comments you have, and we'll respond to them as quickly as possible. But Tony, it's been really, really great having a talk with you, and I look forward to speaking very soon.